Have you ever noticed that in most of the decisions you make, you're not the one in control? It's fear. It whispers before you even act. It shapes your choices, limits your movements, defines what you accept, and even what you believe is possible. And the most dangerous part? You rarely realize you're being guided by it. Thomas Hobbes said something that cuts across centuries with almost unsettling precision. Fear is the most powerful weapon in the world. But what if that's not just a philosophical observation? What if it's a revelation about how the world actually works, even today? Because while you're watching this, entire systems, political, social, digital, depend on your fear to exist, and you are participating in it without realizing it. Now answer me with brutal honesty. How many decisions in your life were truly free? And how many were just reactions to fear? Pause. Because from this moment on, you might start to see something you can never unsee. Hobbes wasn't talking about simple everyday fear. He was talking about something deeper, structural. For him, fear was the foundation of society. Without fear, there would be no order. Without fear, there would be no obedience. Without fear, there would be no power. And that leads us to an uncomfortable point. Maybe civilization isn't built on freedom, but on organized fear. Now think with me. Why do people obey laws? Why do they avoid certain behaviors? Why do they follow rules, norms, authorities? The obvious answer is because they believe it's right. But that's just the surface. Underneath, there's always fear. Fear of punishment, fear of rejection, fear of losing status, fear of being excluded, fear of not surviving. And here begins the first layer of the trap. Because when you believe you're acting by choice, but you're actually reacting to fear, you lose something fundamental: awareness. Socrates said that true wisdom begins when you recognize that you don't know. But what he didn't say, and maybe couldn't, is that true freedom begins when you recognize how much you are being controlled. And fear is the primary mechanism of that control. Now let's go deeper. Fear is not just an emotion, it's a system. Inside your brain, there's a structure called the amygdala, responsible for detecting threats and triggering fast survival responses. It wasn't designed to seek truth, it was designed to keep you alive. And that leads to something dangerous. It prefers a false positive over a fatal mistake. In other words, it's better to feel fear about something that isn't dangerous than to not feel fear about something that could kill you. The result? Your brain is wired to exaggerate threats, and in the modern world, that becomes a perfect tool for manipulation. Because today, threats are no longer just physical. They are symbolic, social, psychological, digital. And that changes everything. You're not just afraid of dying. You're afraid of being ignored, of failing, of not being enough, of not belonging, of being judged. And now, someone has noticed that. Actually, many have. Governments, companies, digital platforms, even individuals in personal relationships. They all understood one thing. If you can control someone's fear, you don't need to control anything else. Niccolò Machiavelli once said, "It's safer to be feared than loved." But in the modern world, this has evolved. Today, you don't need to appear threatening. You just need to trigger the right fear at the right time. And you can influence millions without force, without violence, without resistance. Now observe this. When you open social media, what shows up the most? Alarming news, conflicts, crises, comparisons, unreachable standards, all of it delivering constant microdoses of fear. Fear of falling behind, fear of not being enough, fear of losing relevance. And here comes a key concept from modern psychology. The human brain doesn't clearly distinguish between physical threats and social threats. Rejection activates areas similar to physical pain. In other words, being ignored hurts, and that silent fear shapes entire behaviors. You post something, hoping for validation. You avoid saying something for fear of judgment. You adjust your personality to fit in. And slowly, you stop being yourself. But the most unsettling part is still ahead, because there's a deeper level of fear, a level that isn't always visible, a level that isn't always conscious. Carl Jung called it the shadow. The part of you that you don't want to see, your repressed impulses, your denied desires, your hidden weaknesses. And do you know what protects that shadow? Fear. Fear of facing who you really are. Because deep down, the greatest threat isn't outside, it's inside. And this is where most people get stuck, because it's much easier to fear the world than to confront yourself. But that escape comes at a cost. When you avoid your own shadow, it doesn't disappear. It manifests as anxiety, as insecurity, as self-sabotage, as repetitive patterns. And the most dangerous part, it makes you manipulable, because anyone who understands your insecurities can use them against you. Now stop for a second and think. How many times have you avoided doing something important out of fear? How many opportunities did you lose? How many times did you stay silent? How many times did you shrink yourself? This is not just any fear. This is the fear that builds invisible limits, and the cruelest part is that those limits feel natural. But they're not. They were learned, conditioned, reinforced since childhood. And that takes us even deeper. Friedrich Nietzsche said that man would rather will nothingness than not will at all. But there's something even more disturbing. Man would rather live limited than face the fear of freedom. Because freedom demands responsibility, and responsibility demands confrontation. Confrontation with your choices, your mistakes, your truth. And that is terrifying. Far more than following a predefined path. That's why so many people stay in jobs they hate, relationships that make no sense, routines that drain their life. Not because they can't leave, but because they fear the unknown. And the unknown is where control disappears. And without control, fear grows. Now, connect this back to Hobbes. If fear maintains order, then any system that wants to sustain itself needs fear. That doesn't mean everything is a conspiracy, but it does mean fear is functional. It keeps people predictable, controllable, and above all, obedient. But there's one detail that changes everything. One detail very few people notice. Fear only works as long as you don't fully understand it. Because the moment you begin to see the mechanism, something shifts. You start questioning. You start noticing patterns. You start seeing where you used to just react. And that threatens the system itself. Now pay close attention, because this is where things start to get really interesting. There is a specific kind of fear that sustains all the others. A central fear, a fear that is rarely named, but sits behind almost every human decision. And when you understand this fear, you don't just understand the world. You understand why it works the way it does, and more importantly, why you work the way you do. But before revealing it, you need to realize one last thing. Because if you don't see this, what comes next won't make sense. Fear doesn't just limit, it also creates identity. Yes, part of who you think you are was built to avoid fear. You are not just your choices. You are your defenses, your protection strategies, your survival mechanisms. And that means if fear disappears, part of you disappears too. And that is exactly why facing fear is so difficult. Because it's not just about courage. It's about dissolving versions of yourself. Now think about this deeply. If you no longer feared judgment, would you still be the same person? If you didn't fear failure, would you make the same decisions? If you didn't fear rejection, would you keep the same relationships? Maybe not. And that creates a paradox. You want to be free from fear, but at the same time, you depend on it to maintain who you think you are. And it's here, exactly here, that we reach the most critical point of this entire discussion. There's a fear that doesn't just control your actions, it defines your entire reality. A fear so deep that most people spend their entire lives without realizing they are living inside it. And when you finally identify that fear, everything changes. The way you think, the way you act, the way you see the world, but also the way you see yourself. And it's at this point that almost no one is prepared to arrive. Now take a breath, because what comes next isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. That central fear, the one that sustains all the others, is not the fear of death, as many believe. It's not the fear of pain, not rejection, not failure. All of those are just manifestations. The root fear is the fear of being nothing. Pause. Not being important, not being recognized, not having value, not leaving a mark, not truly existing. And when you understand this, everything starts to reorganize in your mind. Because suddenly it makes sense. It makes sense why you care so much about other people's opinions. It makes sense why rejection hurts so deeply. It makes sense why failure feels so devastating. It's not about the event itself, it's about what it represents. Failure feels like proof that you have no value. Rejection feels like confirmation that you're not enough. Being ignored feels like your existence is being erased. And here's the most uncomfortable part. A large part of what you do isn't to live. It's to avoid feeling that. Friedrich Nietzsche once said that he who has a why can endure almost any how. But what happens when your why isn't to live, but to escape that void? Then you're not building a life, you're building a distraction. Now look around you. Social media, the pursuit of status, the constant need for validation, the silent comparison. All of it revolves around the same thing. Proving that you exist, that you matter, that you have value. But there's a brutal problem with that. Because when your value depends on external perception, you become a slave to it, and fear takes control again. Every time. Carl Jung warned that what you do not confront controls you. And here is the final trap. If you don't face the fear of being nothing, you spend your entire life trying to be something for others. And in that process, you lose yourself. But now, pay very close attention, because this is where everything shifts. That fear of being nothing only exists because you believe you need to be something, that you need a role, a status, a solid identity. But what if that's an illusion? Socrates said, "Know thyself." But almost no one understands what that really means. It's not about discovering who you are. It's about realizing that what you call you is a construction, a narrative, a collection of stories, fears, experiences, and conditioning. And if that is a construction, then the fear of being nothing is based on something that was never fixed to begin with. Now feel the impact of that. You were afraid of losing something that was never truly solid. You were defending an identity that was built to protect you. And that changes the entire game. Because if fear is based on an illusion, then the most powerful weapon in the world might not be so powerful after all. But wait, it's not that simple, because even if it's a construction, that identity feels real. And so does the fear. Your body reacts, your heart races, your mind creates scenarios, your behavior shifts. In other words, even if fear isn't absolute, it still has real effects. And that's why most people remain trapped. They understand it rationally, but they can't move through it emotionally. And this is where something few philosophers explained in a practical way comes in. Niccolò Machiavelli understood fear as a tool of external control. But there's something even more sophisticated. Self-control based on fear. You no longer need someone to control you. You do it yourself. You limit yourself, censor yourself, sabotage yourself, keep yourself within invisible boundaries, and believe that it's normal. Now think about this deeply. The most efficient system of control is the one where the person maintains their own prison, without realizing it, without questioning it, without trying to leave. But here's the turning point. If fear is learned, it can also be unlearned. If it was conditioned, it can be reprogrammed. But that requires something most people are not willing to do. Feel the fear without escaping it, without numbing it, without distracting yourself, without rationalizing it. Feel it. Because fear only maintains power while you avoid it. The moment you face it, it starts to lose structure. And here's something Stoicism pointed out thousands of years ago. Stoicism teaches that it's not events that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. But there's an essential addition. It's not just interpretation, it's emotional resistance. You don't suffer only because of what happens. You suffer because you don't accept feeling what it triggers. And fear grows exactly in that resistance. Now imagine this in practice. You fear judgment, so you avoid exposure. But by avoiding it, you reinforce the idea that it's dangerous, and the fear grows. Now if you expose yourself and feel the discomfort, without escaping, without hiding, without justifying, something different happens. The fear doesn't disappear immediately, but it loses authority. It stops being a command and becomes just a sensation. And that is freedom, not the absence of fear, but the absence of submission to fear. Friedrich Nietzsche said you must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. But almost no one accepts that chaos, because it means facing the void, facing uncertainty, facing the absence of guarantees. And that activates that central fear, the fear of being nothing. But here's the final paradox. When you move through that fear, you discover something unexpected. You don't stop existing. You stop needing to prove that you exist. And that changes everything. You start acting out of choice, not defense. You start speaking from truth, not validation. You start living without hiding behind safe versions of yourself. And at that point, fear stops being a weapon against you and becomes just a signal, an indicator, an energy that can be used instead of avoided. But this isn't the end, because there's one final detail. A detail that separates those who understand this intellectually from those who actually transform their lives. You don't defeat fear once, you encounter it repeatedly, at different levels, in different situations, in more subtle forms. And each time, you have a choice. Return to autopilot or remain aware, and that choice defines everything. Now let me ask you one final question, and answer with total honesty. After everything you've seen, will you keep being guided by fear, or will you finally start seeing it? If this video made you think, if any part of this truly moved you, don't let it pass unnoticed, like the video. Subscribe to the channel Art of Awareness, and comment below. What fear do you realize is controlling your life the most right now? Because sometimes, the first step to freedom is simply having the courage to admit it.